wait for the,
Passed out for us to come in?
Do you want me to shut it?
no, just wait for the
I've been
video
talking
guy
to
to
him
put us
for the
on.
last couple of
The
weeks.
mics are live, by the way.
Refuse medical
The
treatment.
mics are alive.
I will,
Mr. Siegel, Alderman Siegel.
I will call the public hearing to order at 7 o'clock and ask the clerk to call the roll.
Yes, sir, Mr. Chairman. Alderman Richard A. Dowd is not present apparently tonight. Alderman at Large Lori Wilshire is apparently not present. Alderman at Large Brian S. McCarthy,
Present.
Chair. Alderman at Large Michael O'Brien.
Present.
Alderman Sean McGinnis, I am here. Alderman David Shoneman. Here. And Alderman Ken Siegel.
Present.
And also present Alderman Dean and Alderman LeBron.
I am sorry, also present is Alderman Deed, the mayor, and Alderman Don LeBrun.
First item is a public hearing on R-17-091, discontinuing the capital reserve fund for building replacement or renewal due to disuse. And I'll recognize the mayor to explain the legislation.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair. And as you see from the legislation, the proposal is to bond $7.5 million a year for 5 years to do a big leap forward in.
It's the wrong piece of legislation.
Oh, sorry.
We're on discontinuing the
Oh, well,
building reserve fund.
sorry. David's going to speak on that. Mr. Fredette.
Excuse me.
Mr. Chairman, this is just a continuation of last summer. We cleaned up a lot of older trust funds that were no longer in use. This was created in 2000. It was only used once, and there's been no money put into it since. And we created a newer fund in 2011, I believe, and that's for building renovations. And that one has been used, has been funded and been used quite a bit. This goes back to 2000 and just has never been used. It's very similar.
Is there any money in the fund?
For a little over 4,000, that money would lapse into surplus
Okay.
when you close the account out.
Any questions from the committee before we begin the hearing? Is there any testimony in favor of Resolution 17-091? Seeing none, I'll ask for testimony in opposition. Once again, in favor of R-17-091, and once again in opposition, we will call the hearing closed and move on to Resolution 1792, authorizing the mayor and city treasurer to issue bonds not to exceed the amount of $37,500,000 to fund the multi-year paving project. Mayor Donches.
Mr. President, or Mr. Chair, the proposal, as you just stated, is to bond $7.5 million a year for 5 years to pay for a $37.5 million paving program to achieve a big leap forward in pavement quality. So what you're going to hear tonight is Bill Scarpati from Stantec is going to give a presentation regarding the one you see up above, the pavement management study that they conducted, and give you the details regarding that. And then once that's concluded, we will show you the financing plan that we're proposing for the project. Now, why doesn't Bill come on up? What? He's going to. And we also have Lisa Foto, Director of Public Works, and Ms. Gill, City Engineer, or an engineer for the city, who may help with the presentation. You coming up, Lisa? Ms. Foto coming in? So, Director Foto was very involved in working with Stantec to bring this proposal, or bring the study forward. There was a lot of tweaking that was done over a period of time. Also, Mr. Dukran, the city engineer, was involved, and both are available to answer questions regarding the study. So if the chair is ready to proceed, Mr. Scarpati can go ahead with the presentation.
Please proceed.
be with
You wanna
Stantec.
lift the microphone up a little bit, so,
Can you hear me now?
yeah.
Lift it up and pull it towards you.
How's that? Here we go. I'm a principal asset management specialist with Stantec. Been working with the Public Works Department and the engineering staff for a little over 6 months in developing their pavement management program. Tonight, I'm going to recap a presentation that was given to the Board of Public Works of Commissioners back in January, was it? So I'm going to try to be brief and go through this. I know some of you have seen this before. Real quick on the agenda, I'm going to talk a little bit about the pavement management methodology, the current condition metrics based on the inventory that was done, and then some budget analyses and recommendations. So back last fall, the city conducted a citywide pavement inventory of 300 centerline miles of pavement evaluations that included a detailed distress identification and quantification of different types of pavement distresses that are out there, such as potholes, alligator cracking, transverse longitudinal cracking. The severity and extent was identified, and based on those distresses, we then calculate what we call a pavement condition index, or a PCI score, on a 0 to 100 scale. 100 being a road that's in excellent condition, and 0 being a road that's nearly impassable. So all the streets have a rating. They're put into a comprehensive database over at the Public Works Department, where Stantec came in and used that asset management system to analyze several different funding scenarios, which we'll get into. This slide illustrates the life of a pavement as it relates PCI over time. During the pavement's life, it goes through what we call interventions bands or treatment bands. So up at the top, roads are in excellent condition. There's no immediate maintenance needed. It falls into the routine maintenance band. This is where you got some hairline cracking that needs to be sealed to prevent water intrusion, freeze-thaw cycling. And then we come to the next band where you can see the curve really starts to steeping. And this is called the preventative maintenance band. This is where we do more than a routine maintenance effort. We'll do things like an extensive crack seal or a micro surface treatment or a very thin chip seal or rubber chip. Roads here have plenty of service life to preserve. We also refer to streets that fall in this band as preservation maintenance. Roads that fall in the structural improvement band are in poor condition. These are streets that need to be resurfaced, cold planed, overlaid, mill and filled, typical of an annual resurfacing program where you remove about 1.5 to 3 inches of material and replace the wear and surface course. And then finally, roads that fall in the base rehabilitation treatment band have failed, and they need to be fully reconstructed. So the whole idea is as roads deteriorate, they slip through these intervention phases and they're costing more and more. So as of July 2016, the average PCI in the city of Nashua was 77.2. So you can see it's right at that critical point on the curve where a lot of the road network is about to slip into more expensive repair categories. These are some treatment band examples. Up at the left, you've got a PCI 98 on Manchester Street. This is do nothing. So this is a road that was paved not too long ago, and we're monitoring the conditions of it. Road that's in the middle there, routine maintenance, that's a 93. And you've got the longitudinal seam opening up at the joint of the paving seam. This is a great candidate for a low-cost crack seal. Bring it back up on the curb and start deteriorating again. You've got on the far right, a PCI of 83, so here you can see the pavement has oxidized a little more. You've got not only the longitudinal cracking, but you've got some other transverse cracking. Still plenty of life to preserve, but it's really doing the right thing at the right time here. We come in, we do some crack sealing, we do a thin overlay or a micro surface, freshen up the pavement markings, and we get a good 7-year life extension on that road. PCI of 55, structural improvement. This is Hollis, West Hollis Street. So here you've got, much more severe cracking in the wheel paths, indicating structural failure. So this is a good candidate where you come in, cold plane, remove about 2 to 3 inches of material, get rid of the fatigue cracking, come back with a thin overlay and perhaps a leveling course. And then you've got your PCI 29 base rehab, clearly with all the alligator cracking, potholes, non-utility patching, and delaminations going on. These problems go right through the entire pavement, right into the foundation, and this is a good reconstruction or a reclamation candidate. So all our pavements are constantly deteriorating, and it's all about doing the right thing at the right time. This is the second metric that we look at in addition to PCI. It's the distribution of the city 300 miles broken down by treatment bands. So you can see, to no surprise, we've got 103 miles in the preventative maintenance band. That's a third of the network that sits on that band. The next one is the structural improvement. We've got 76.6 miles there. So this poses a challenge. These are large piles of streets that are going to be coming due for maintenance. The base rehabilitation, we've got 15 miles. That doesn't scare me. It's rather small. It can't get any worse. It's only going to cost me today's price plus inflation down the road. And then you've got your do-nothings, which is good. You've got almost 25% of the network in that category, which is good. So this is the third metric. We look at kind of the finances of the issue. And so we've got what we call the backlog, the cost of bringing up all the streets to a near perfect condition within 1 year. It represents how far behind we are. So you can see right away the 76 miles in that structural improvement band that represents 25% of the road actually represents 50% of the backlog. So it's a very costly problem of streets that we have. Not to mention the preventative maintenance is really where the bulk of the other backlog piece goes to at 20 million. So simple math, today we're spending $2.3 million a year on our pavements. It's not going to go very far, looking at that backlog. So Stantec evaluated several 10-year future funding scenarios using the city's asset management system, Cartograph. The first scenario we looked at is that historical budget, $2.3 million a year. What happens to the PCI? What happens to the backlog if we continue down this path? What we see is significant regression in the PCI. PCI goes from 77 to the mid-50s. Backlog of 50 million today grows to 120 million. So there's certainly room for improvement, a little bit on prioritizing the roads. So when we have streets that have the same PCI, equal PCI, we look at a benefit value, which takes into account arterials and collectors. And so the prioritization, all the scenarios prioritize the arterial network first because naturally you've got more people using the main arteries and they tend to get programmed first, just a note. The second scenario we looked at was the equilibrium funding scenario. This looks at spending $5.9 million over the next 10 years. It's 59 million over the year. And after the outcome of this program, we would have spent 23 million on the arterials, while 61% of that 59 million would go towards the local network or the neighborhoods. Another scenario we looked at is what we're calling the progressive funding scenario. But just to back up, on the equilibrium scenario, reason why we picked that one is because the PCI was stable. So that was enough money to keep the PCI to where we are today in the backlog in equilibrium. It's essentially a sustainable program based on the conditions today. The progressive funding program looks to improve the PCI and reduce the backlog. And this is 7.5 million for 10 years. The allocation strategy, using the benefit value, we see 30% of the money going towards the arterials, and that would typically happen early on in the pavement management program. And then the remaining 70% of the budget would go towards the local streets. I don't know how well you can see this map, but the one on the right shows the 5.9 million per year 10-year program. Both programs cover the city really well. The one on the left is the 7.5. There are significantly more streets getting done, especially in the neighborhoods with the $7.5 million program. So this looks at the future PCI projections with respect to the different functional classes. So rather than looking at that 77 as an average PCI, we broke it down by the functional class. Up at the top, we see the arterial collector PCI just in the low 80s. And the great thing about the red represents the 5.9 per year, the equilibrium scenario, and the green represents the 7.5. They both do a great job, really equal, even though one is spending a little more money. It's getting a higher PCI faster. However, on the local streets, we're seeing it's going to take a while. It's going to take 3 years. You're actually going to see a degradation in the local road network just because there's naturally more streets to address. But one of the things we're proposing, if we look at the area between these two curves, we can actually take that money and apply it just to above this green line. So we'll actually start out at a $7.5 million program with an equilibrium sort of residential PCI, and then gradually work our way up. The other thing is the 7.5 gets that PCI right up into the high 80s. And once we're there, it's actually what we found, it's lower to maintain that condition, a lower cost. Where the 5.9 on the local network, it improves, and it actually slightly decreases over 10 years by a PCI point. So in conclusion, the city of Nashua needs to increase its roadway funding. Clearly, the 2.3 million historically is not enough. At a minimum, 5.9 is needed just to maintain where we are today. We recommend a 7.5 million scenario, not only for the PCI, but for that local road network. You know, the goal again is to get the arterial network in the high 80s. The low 90s, and the local network in the high 80s. And that's what that program does. Can't emphasize enough, we got to practice routine and preventative maintenance. Nearly 1/3 of the network is in this treatment ban, as we saw. So the city is being proactive in piloting a crack sealing and micro surfacing program this construction season, to look at the pros and cons and the logistics of implementing it at a larger scale. And lastly, we've got to continue pavement management. It's a process. You go out, you reevaluate the roads on an annual basis. You're continuing to monitor and track performance, and you're setting goals and basically establishing and maintaining a 5-year capital improvement plan. And that plan really is it's a dynamic plan because it serves as a transparent plan for the public, but also for utility coordination. Utilities got to be, when you go to look to spend additional monies, the utilities got to be on board. You want to make sure that they're coming in years 1 and 2, and you're coming in year 3 and 4 with your paving the surface investment. And with that, that concludes my presentation. Thank you.
Does Ms. Photo or Mr. Dukran have anything to add on that?
I just wanted to point out, as Steve Dugan, city engineer, a couple of the photographs that demonstrated the PCIs, just to preempt any questions. West Hollis Street, the PCI 55, that section was paved last year. So if you're going to go out there and look for that PCI, you wouldn't see that anymore. As well as Tinker Road, that also was addressed last year. Some extent of that was shown. So those two examples are no longer existing. Thank you.
Once we're done with the Get Well plan in 10 years, what's the steady state cost to keep the residential roads at 88?
Yeah, we looked at that scenario. We looked at years 11 through 15, and it's looking to be between 3.2 and 3.8 million per year.
Okay, I will ask for testimony in favor of Resolution 17-092, authorizing the mayor and city treasurer to issue bonds not to exceed the amount of $37,500,000 to fund a
Chair.
multi-year paving project.
We were also going to present the payment plan, so you,
Oh,
as part of the
okay.
public hearing. So that we could get comments on that as well, if
By all
that's,
means.
is that all right?
Yep.
Can we put up the spreadsheet? All right, Mr. Chair, I'll just talk through it, and then Mr. Griffin and Mr. Fredette are here to answer any questions that I couldn't answer. But what you see is a spreadsheet of the current roadway fund that we have, starting with fiscal 18. And the first column, of course, gives you the fiscal year. The second column gives you the balance in the fund. The third column projects the amount of revenue that would be directed into the fund from the motor vehicle registration fees. The fourth column makes an estimate of the highway block grant that we would be getting from the state government on an annual basis. The next column totals the motor vehicle registration revenue plus the highway block grant. The next column, entitled Bonded Debt Service, states the principal and interest that would need to be paid on the debt that would be incurred at the rate of $7.5 million a year. The next column, ending balance, shows what the balance in the fund would be. And the next two columns show the amount borrowed and the interest rate. So what we have now, Mr. Chair, is we have going into the Special Road and Highway Fund, we are directing the $700,000 of motor vehicle registration fees, as well as the revenue highway block grant, for a total of around $2.3 million a year. And the spreadsheet assumes that we would continue to direct those sources of revenue into the fund, and that in year 4, we would increase the motor vehicle revenues going into the fund from 700,000 to 1,000,001, in other words, by 400,000. And it shows, if you look at the ending balance, in year one, of course, year 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, you would see a mounting surplus in the account because the cost of borrowing the first 7.5 million in year one is less than 2.3 million. The cost of borrowing the first 2 years, $7.5 million for 2 years, the cost of paying that is less than the 2.3 million. But as the amount of the debt service increases, we see the surplus, which would build to around $5 million, beginning to decline. But at least for the first $5 million, 5 years, $7.5 million of borrowing every year, the balance in the account, in the fund, given these revenue sources and given the $7.5 million a year, never declines below zero, and hits a low point of $140,000. And that's the spreadsheet that we have on the board or up on the screen, and shows you how our current revenue sources plus 400,000 beginning in year 4 could pay for the first 5 years of borrowing. And any of us can answer questions on this from any of the members.
Alderman Moriarty?
I'm curious what the year-by-year planned expenditures for road repair is.
Well, the amount expended for road repairs would be $7.5 million a year.
So then after the first 5 years, there's no expenditures for road repair for the next 13 years?
Well, at that point, we would
Or
have
actually-
to develop, or between now and then, we would have to develop the plan to fund years 5 through 10. But there are a lot of things that could happen in those 5 years. For example, right now, the governor is proposing, I'm looking at an article from the Telegraph, the governor has, and Majority Leader Bradley and Majority Leader Hinch from the House have proposed that the highway block grant be doubled for municipalities. Now, we don't know if that's going to happen, but if it did, of course, it would make, adding $1.5 million a year for 5 years to this projection would carry us way into year 7 or 8. Also, the highway block grant, even under the current system, without the governor's proposal, is likely to grow more than we've projected. I mean, we've used very conservative numbers. So over the course of the next 5 years, as we see how the program rolls out, I think we can develop a funding plan for the remainder of the program.
Alderman Moriarty?
But at least as shown, the plan is not to spend anything on road repair for 15 years. My question on the simulation, it shows the local streets improving. I don't understand how that happens, how they degrade during the period of time that you're actually paving them, and then they improve during the period of time that you're actually not paving them.
Well,
Alderman Dean?
earlier in the presentation, it was stated that we would be required to be spending about $3.5 million a year to maintain the streets after they're done paving them. So there'd be a maintenance program put in place. Is it 3.2 million, isn't that what you said? I wrote that down somewhere.
It's a program.
Alderman
So let me ask, so I saw the entire presentation, I was in the back watching it. So maybe please clarify the funding scenario PCI projections. You show how the local streets and the arterial streets change in PCI value over a course of 11 years. How are they changing? How are they improving? what's the assumptions of the spending? Because that's why I asked, how much are we spending on paving year by year? And the answer is we're spending $7.5 million per year for 5 years. And then according to this sheet, there's no spending on any paving after that. But this simulation doesn't seem to be consistent with those numbers.
I think what I heard is we have to figure out the second half of the plan sometime within the next 5 years.
The plan.
Can I address that?
Alderman Siegel?
Thank you. So if you looked at the graphs, you'd notice there's several years that require no maintenance whatsoever. There's several years that require on the order of hundreds of thousands of dollars of maintenance, relatively small money.
Could I ask the guy who made the simulation if he could explain how the basis of the simulation was?
Well, I'm not done answering it, but if that,
I never got the answer in the first place.
well, I'm trying to explain something
Alderman
because,
Siegel has the floor, Alderman Moriarty.
thank you. So there's a period of time, several years, where no maintenance is required, and several years where minimal maintenance is required. And there was a plan that was put in place, a certain number of millions of dollars, which covered both that and the additional maintenance that's required. So over the $7.5 million are progressively getting the roads up to the point where they're all at the highest level that doesn't require significant amounts of maintenance. So it isn't like we spend $7.5 million and then go to sleep and let nothing happen. So and this was in the presentation.
That's not true. The answer that I got from the mayor was that we do $7.5 million a year, and then we don't spend anything for the next 15 years, according to this sheet.
No, that was not the way the presentation was done.
It would be better if we got
Okay,
recognized
I'm just not going to
before we
argue
spoke.
about this.
Alderman Siegel?
Let's move on.
Alderman Moriarty?
So I'll go back a few minutes and ask the simulation that we have here, what are the assumptions of the simulation spending year by year?
There were two simulations. There was a 5.9 million per year, and then there was a 7.5 million per year, both for 10 years, okay?
So in each case, that spending is every year for 10 years. Whereas the sheet that we have on the finances only shows us spending that much money for 5 years. So I conclude that there's a huge discrepancy between the simulation that we got and the actual finances. Is that a true statement?
It's the beginning of the $7.5 million program. It's, we're trying to use curves to predict where we're going as far as condition. And, there's just family of curves in there based on conditions. So certainly as you do go through the process of investing in your roads, you're going to continually monitor. So the 7.5 million, in year 6, it may be 7 million because, weather didn't deteriorate the pavements as much as we thought. But based on the simulation that you're looking at, it's taken the 7.5 million over 10 years, and it's making allocations to different treatment bands. So it's a balanced attack. You're doing crack sealing, chip sealing, resurfacing, a simultaneous program.
So then the conclusion is that the simulation actually costs $75 million, but the bond is for only $37.5 million.
That is correct.
Okay.
Yep.
With that, I'll take testimony in favor of R 17-082, authorizing the mayor and city treasurer to issue bonds not to exceed the amount of $37,500,000 to fund a multi-year paving project. Is there anyone wishing to speak in favor?
Respectable, Mr. Chair, I am not sure I'm in favor or not in favor, depending on the series of questions I have. So, you want to speak now or speak the next term?
Go ahead.
Okay, can I sit down somewhere? I have a lot of notes here.
Sure, take Alderman McGinnis's seat.
Next Alderman, Lucan. Okay, my name is Fred Tebow. I'm 24 Cheyenne Drive. I got cost questions, and then I got some technical road questions. So let me start with the cost questions, and the chart is up. I looked at the data this afternoon, and I asked David for that some questions, and he came back with this chart, so I had a chance to analyze this chart. Now, if you look at this chart, which lays out a 20-year bond payment plan for $37.5 million, and breaks it up into 5 bond issues. But it takes 20 years to pay that back. So first of all, I'm concerned about the fact we're dealing with a 10-year plan. Well, at least the PCI, as I understand it. Well, I'll go back to that, the technical part. We're dealing with a 20-year plan on a 5-year program. So the remaining, you got 15 years left. You spend the money on the roads, and now you got 20 years to pay for this thing. And I don't know whether these roads will last 20 years. The idea of a bond is it's supposed to last as long as that which you bond. So can somebody answer the first question? Perhaps this gentleman with technical knowledge.
Well, I'll give it to David, but the bonds are actually would be issued for 15 years, but the reason you see 20 is that some of the debt is issued in year 5 plus 15, of course, takes you out 20 years, but the bonds.
That's not true.
What?
You know, the way I got it laid out, each bond runs for 15 years? Right. Okay.
And the reason you
I take
see
it back.
20, the reason you see 20 is that some of the borrowing would not occur till year 5. 15 years from then would take you out to year 20.
Okay. Now, this is only inside of a special revenue fund. So these bonds have to be self-contained and paid from the special revenue fund, as I understand it. Is that true?
They would be general obligation bonds of the city, but the funding plan would take the money from the special revenue fund, yes.
Okay, so that brings up my next question. If you look closely at the plan, the motor vehicle revenues go up slightly in the beginning after the 4th year. It goes up to from 700,000 to 1.1 million and stays at 1.1 million. That's possible, but the next one is probably more problematical. The hybrid block grant goes from 1.571 million to 1.621 million. It goes up in increments of 50,000 every 3 years. And then $5,000 the last 3 years. But that assumes that the state's going to give them extra money. So you start with 1.57, and you wind up at 1.82. But that's a very iffy scenario, because if you look close at this chart, in the end, yes, you have a balance of 6.635 million. But if you closely look at the the 14th year and the 15th year, it's the easiest way to check it. You say you only got 140,000. And next one you have 185,000. So if you don't have the block grants match your scenario of these increases, you're going to be in a negative balance paying these bonds. If that's the case, what do you do?
You find another source of revenue to pay for the bonds. The highway block grant numbers are very conservative. In the past few years, 4 or 5 years, it's gone up about 50,000 a year. In this chart, I only have it going up 50,000 every 3 years. So the number is very conservative. Motor vehicle revenue goes up in year 2021. That would be something that had to be done by the Board of Aldermen, just as they did for the 700,000 about 3 years ago. So that comes directly out of the revenue.
But it's an estimate. I mean, you have no way of
The whole
knowing.
page is an estimate.
Yeah.
The
You have no way of
rates,
knowing.
the only thing isn't is the 37.5 million, but everything else is an estimate, yes.
So if you don't meet these estimates, then where do you get the source of the money?
That would be a decision made by the Board of Aldermen and the mayor at the time.
Okay.
Would have to be raised by taxes, Fred. Is that what you want to hear?
It's just, I'm just trying to point out that these are what I consider to be optimistic scenarios. The next question I have is, the cost is not trivial. You're spending $48.6 million. That's in the bond debt service, $48.6 million for a $37.5 million bond. That means you're paying $11,100,000. About 30% is the cost. That's a substantial cost for this bond. And that cost does not go into paying for one stone on those roadways. It all goes to the financiers and the banks.
It does, however, save against the segments of road that would fall further down on the PCI curve before we got around to them if we funded it pay-as-you-go.
That is true. You're paying a lot of money because you don't have the cash. The problem with bonding is some communities go bankrupt. They bond so much, they want them going bankrupt. You gotta be careful. You start bonding for buildings, now you're bonding for things that basically should be capital improvements in the budget. We typically in this city have not. When's the last time we bonded for roadways, Mr. Mayor?
I don't think we ever have, but you've also seen the condition of the roads deteriorate considerably over the last number of years. There have been a number of other communities that have bonded to make a big improvement in street quality. Londonderry is one. Bedford, Providence, Rhode Island, and others. I mean, to obtain $7.5 million per year without bonding, if that were the program, we would have to raise taxes by a very considerable amount, and we would have to get a cap override because there's no way you could fit that under the cap. You know, this seems like a reasonable approach to take.
Okay, which brings me to my next question. This whole question came up to R-15-170, year and a half ago. In October 2015, Mayor Lozo, and you were then a alderman, Mayor Donches, brought forth a $17 million bond resolution for 15 years. That got voted, adopted by the budget committee. When it went to the full board, it got rejected and sent back to the budget committee, and it died at the end of that term. Now, there was, for 15 years, 17 million, and that got turned down. And the reason that got turned down, I went back to, I actually pulled the minutes back out. My memory doesn't go that long. Alderman Siegel actually lost sleep over it, he said in the minutes. The problem was,
Call that,
I found it, you said you lost sleep over it.
yes.
But Alderman Dean said, and he was sort of the lead on this thing, he said there was no, he berated Mayor Lozo for not having a plan. She presented a bunch of view graphs about the roads she was gonna do. Not the PCI thing that this gentleman did, but a road plan. And I think the objection was that most of that 17 million was gonna be spent, if not all of it, on, I believe, arterial roadways.
Correct. You were correct, Fred. That was my
Not
objection.
on the, not on
Neighborhood
neighborhood.
streets. Correct.
But I didn't see a single chart that dealt with the plan. So where is the plan, and why would this succeed for 37.5 million, when the $17 million plan did not succeed, and that had a plan, and this has no plan? At least I didn't see a plan.
Mr. Timo, I think one thing that was a
What
fact.
plan is on this page, Fred?
There's a map, Fred.
There's a map that shows what streets will be
That's a
paved
map,
in what years.
but that's not a plan.
Well, it's got a ledger on it. There's a plan associated with it.
It shows what street in what year.
What more do you want for a plan?
Well, I haven't seen those charts. They weren't handed
there.
out. They were not on the website.
Didn't you get a copy of this before the
No.
meeting?
No.
But can I mention one other thing? One of the big reasons that the bond issue was delayed was that we were waiting to get the PCI study done, and we didn't have a objective, comprehensive way to look at the street quality of all 1,300 streets at the same time. So the point was, rather than just kind of go by guesswork and spend that kind of money kind of guessing what streets needed to be done, we wanted Stantec to complete the study so we could get an objective analysis of each street and could make the most, and could expend the funds in the most efficient and wisest way using objective and scientific criteria. And now we have the study, and that's,
Okay, so
That's
let me
the
ask you
point.
about this thing. I hadn't seen this, but I just like take some notes in the presentation. And you got 5.9 million for 10 years and 5.9 million for 10 years. That's $59 million. And here's the 7.5 million for 10 years. That's 75 million. But you haven't got 59 million, and you haven't got 75 million. You're asking for a bond for 37.5 million. So how can this be a plan?
because because it's very difficult to project revenue over out more than 5 years. I mean, as I said, we're looking at a proposal now to double the highway block grant. Now, that's not in the plan because we don't know that's going to happen, but it could. I mean, we will need to, as we see how this program develops. I mean, we're basing our thinking upon a theoretical approach. I mean, these are projections, but maybe the street improvements maybe the street quality will improve more rapidly. Maybe we will achieve more than we hope with the money that is proposed. Maybe the block grant will double. And if those things don't happen, we will have to decide at year 6 whether to devote tax revenue or more motor vehicle money or whatever, and exactly how much into the program.
I don't necessarily disagree with what you said. You haven't got 75 million, and you haven't got 59 million, and you have a plan here that just barely fits within what you think is a reasonable revenue from motor vehicles.
But it's unclear to me whether you're saying we should undertake nothing or whether we should bond for 75 million and not
No, I
37.
disagree with what you said. I guess what I'm saying is, you berated Mayor Loza for not having a detailed plan. I do not think, this is a kind of an objection. However, your point about, I'd like to spend 75 million, but I haven't got it. And I'd like to spend 59 million, but I haven't got it. But I have 37.5 million if this bond gets approved. And maybe if this bond gets approved, you ought to come back to these aldermen, or the public works perhaps, and come up with a very detailed street-by-street schedule.
We have that, Mr. Tebow. We have a
Have it
very
already?
detailed street-by-street, we do. We didn't include it, but we do
Against the
have,
37.5 million.
yes.
Yeah.
We do,
And that would be the plan.
correct.
All
We
right.
do. In fact, we'll be presenting that to the Board of Public Works, the detailed plan, I believe, at our next meeting. Correct, Bill?
Yeah, that's what it belongs. The only reason I bring it up,
But we do have that. And we,
main reason, and the only reason I bring it up, because Mayor Lozo was raked over the coals in Budget Committee and the full board about not having a plan.
correct.
She had a plan, but the alderman didn't like it. There was
I
a-
don't think it's fair to say she was raked over the
I-
coals. We
I'd like to address that, too.
we said at the time that we wanted to wait for the PCI analysis to be done, and that was the plan that was lacking. And Mayor Lozo, began to initiate that, but it wasn't close to being finished, and it took another year or so to finish it. So that's what was lacking. Now, in terms of the plan of what streets are going to be done in what year, it is expressed in a map as opposed to a list, but we have a legend here that says the red streets would be done in FY 17. And if you look carefully at the map, there are a number of red streets. And then the yellow streets would be done in FY
Yeah,
2018.
but you can't do all of those.
And they're yellow streets. Now, those can be also expressed in a list, and Public Works has that, but it seemed for tonight that this was the most succinct way to present the idea.
I know, but your list is not gonna be all your streets, because you haven't got $75 million. the
That's
point.
correct.
Can I address, you talked about what happened at the last, the plan that Mayor Lozo put forth. There's other issues with that. And as the BPW liaison, just to share with you, yes, the arterials were a big issue. Also, one thing to remember is 7.5 million is probably the limit we could do because of utilities. So this idea that we're going to take this big chunk of money and then, okay, we're all going to spend it on paving, that wasn't possible. Also, the DPW had a new software program that was just getting implemented. So it wasn't even that the streets were surveyed. The software wasn't in place yet to hold the data, had we done it that day. So none of it made sense, literally none of it. So it was a good idea that we rejected it because we're in a much better position to control what we're doing in an organized fashion. So that was the right decision.
Okay. I'm not necessarily disagreeing. I said I
Okay,
didn't know I
thank
was
you.
for or against this thing.
Okay, I just wanted to explain that. Thank
Now,
you.
I have a question about this PCI. When the gentleman presented this chart, I do charts. I mean, I'm an engineer. I used to be an engineer, so we do charts. But there's no scale in your charts. So I thought at the end of 11 years, you're at the end, I thought at the end of 11 years, at the end of that curve, right? You're on the bottom of that curve at the 11 years point?
This one here.
Yes. Is that 11 years out?
This, it's really just a very generic curve, to show that pavements deteriorate in an accelerated fashion. It's all about doing the right thing at the right time. There's actually several curves, that the software uses. And it's typically, 20 years out.
This is 20 years out. Where's
20 to 25 years, depending on the functional class, the thickness of the pavement, the loading that's being applied.
This is 20,
20, roughly, yep.
and this point is there, these are about 3. So this point here is, this point where you say you should start fixing things is what? That's about 8 years or 9 years?
Yeah, routine maintenance is typically 3 to 5 years out. We do some crack sealing. Preservation maintenance is usually 8 to 10 years out. Structural improvement where you,
Right, that's this point here.
yep.
What point is that? The
This is,
structural improvement.
so
Structurally,
you're
you get
pointing
to,
to the bottom, you're pointing to the 68 PCI?
yes,
Okay. Yeah, so that is probably, where you start to get into the structural improvement band. You're probably into the, the 14 to 18-year life, depending on the pavement thickness, the
14.
conditions, the loading. There's a lot of variables that go into it.
that's consistent with
You've done no
Mr.
maintenance at that point.
Dukran said. Mr. Dukran, when he gave his testimony back in 13 October, he said if you put enough, I guess, cover on the roads, it will last 15 years. That's what he said. It's quoted in there. So that's, and then you have serious deterioration after that. But mind you, you're getting a bonding for 20 years. You're doing part of the roads.
It's a 15-year bond, Fred. 15 years.
No, yeah, the whole thing takes 20 years to get to the whole thing. And you're 15 years into it, you haven't paid the thing off yet. Well, you can tell from your schedule. At 20 years, you still have a sizable amount of money to pay. You got to start all over again.
Well, that's where the 3.2 million comes in that was given in the presentation
Which
on the routine maintenance of the roadways that we should be carrying outside of the 2.3 million that we're using now to pave
Maintenance
with.
resets the curve.
Well, let me understand that. Yes, there's an additional 3.2 million on top of this money
That's-
that we're talking about, that's not in the highway fund? We have a highway fund that we collect all this money in. Now you say there's an additional $3.2 million in some other fund?
I think the point is that at the point where the end of the bond is, we need to be spending about $3 million a year on road maintenance. We do not have a plan for where that comes from at that point yet. This is a plan to get us back to an average PCI of 88 for the residential streets and 92 for the arterials.
Let me understand, the end of the bond is 20 years.
Yep.
You're well ahead of the time before you start spending more money now to fix things, and you said, what, 15 years? The bond is not, these bonds are not paid off until 20 years have passed. No matter how you look at it, because staggered approach, the bonds take 20 years to pay. You can invent money.
I think your question's been answered. You just don't like the answer, Fred.
No, I guess I don't quite understand. You'll never get
There is
out
a
of-
part of the plan to do maintenance that is understood to be necessary, that is not part of the bonding plan to get the roads back.
Right, and that's additional money,
At
not
some
part of
point
the
in the
bond.
next 15 years, we have to figure out how to get the yearly expenditure up to a point where we keep the steady state
No.
of the roads at the end.
Well, obviously, even with the, in the program, 59, you haven't got 59 million, so let alone you haven't got enough money to do patching as things deteriorate. I mean, it's just a bad situation. Let me,
But you have 23 million, right? So you're spending 2.3 million a year. And the PCI today is at a 77. And we expect it, based on the deterioration model, to drop to 55, which is, if you look at the curve, it's going to be right at the bottom of the structural improvement band. So you'll have more streets in that yellow pile where you're going to do a lot of resurfacing, very expensive. Yeah, it lasts long, but it's very expensive. The backlog is also going to grow from 50 million today to 120 million, in 10 years. So you've got to do something. You can't just, you got a mortgage and you want to pay what you can afford. And it seems reasonable for a 5-year program at 7.5 million to me. It's pay me now, pay me later. It's going to the dentist every 6 months, you get your teeth cleaned, you change the oil in your car every 3,000 to 4,000 miles, because you want to maintain that investment, that asset. It clearly, just driving around, you can clearly see that the streets have not, they have not been maintained.
all right, final question, is most of this money going to be spent on neighborhood streets as opposed to main streets?
It's a combination of the two, yes.
Okay. That's all the question I have. Yeah, I understand it's a difficult, you can't, it's like maintaining your car. I go to my mechanic and he told me you got to change out all the belts. He said, that includes the timing belt, you got to include the timing belt. So I paid him, because my car's 10 years old, I paid him $800 to change my timing belt. Turns out it was beautiful. It's in prime condition, but, it's one of those things.
I hope you did the water pump at the same time.
Absolutely.
a lot more than a water pump.
And $800 is a lot. Thank you very much. I'm not altogether against this plan, so I won't take any more time.
Is there anyone else wishing to testify in favor of our 17092? In opposition to R 17092? I will ask one more time for testimony in favor, and one more time for testimony in opposition. There being none, I will call the public hearing closed at 8 o'clock and open the regular meeting of the Budget Committee with the same people present. And I would note that Alderman Moriarty joined us during the public hearing. Public comment, is there anyone in the public that wishes to address the committee? Communications,
There are none.
Unfinished business,
There is none.
new business resolutions.
R 17091, discontinuing the capital reserve fund for building replacement or renewal due to disuse.
Is there a motion? Alderman Siegel.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to make a motion for final passage of R 17091.
Motion is by Alderman Siegel is to recommend final passage. Discussion. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? And motion carries. R 17091 is recommended for final passage. Where's the next one?
We do have an additional resolution, Resolution 17092, authorizing the mayor and the city treasurer to issue bonds not to exceed the amount of $37,500,000 to fund a multi-year paving project.
The motion first.
I'll recognize Alderman Siegel.
Motion. I'd like to make a motion for final passage of R 17092.
Did you want to offer some amendments, Alderman Dean?
Yes, I would. I would like to amend the title of the resolution after the word fund to add the language, the first 5 years of a 10-year paving project.
That was the first
5 years of a 10-year paving project.
5 years of a 10-year paving project.
I have a copy I can give you, Alderman McCarthy, if you
Okay.
want. It's just, it is
That'd
simple.
be easier.
Okay. In the first paragraph, the last sentence where it says the useful life of the project is 15 years, I want to put after the number 15 dash 20 years.
Is that it?
And no, and on the purpose section, I want to add in the title, I want to add that same language. The first 5 years of a 10-year paving project. And is it appropriate for me to amend the attorney's analysis by adding a 15-20 in the first paragraph and last sentence?
The attorney's analysis is not really part of the resolution. It's probably not appropriate for us to change it.
To mess around with their vast knowledge of the analysis. I just wanted to
I
make,
mean, you're just echoing what the,
well, I just want to make record of it that,
Okay.
well, why didn't, a couple of years down the road, somebody looking at it saying, well, why is that different from what this is? So I guess the minutes will reflect that you decided that that wasn't appropriate. So those are my amendments.
well, heard the motion. Is there any discussion? If not, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? And motion carries. We're back to the motion for final passage as amended. Discussion? Alderman Moriarty?
Thank you, Mr. President. Oh, excuse me, Board Chairman, Committee Chairman. The PCI simulation is great. Stantec did a good job with that. And the table of estimates of dollars is nicely put together also. The problem is the two are not consistent with each other, and that's a huge problem. There's a minor problem which shows that it assumes the revenue from the motor vehicle revenue is going to be bumped up from $700,000 to $1.1 million, which may pass the Board of Aldermen, but that's $400,000 per year, which is currently paying salaries for teachers and police or whatever. And when you pull that money out of the general fund to pay for the roads, we're going to have to raise taxes by the equivalent $400,000 a year to pay for that, to backfill that hole that was left. That's a different decision to be added to be decided in the future. But in my opinion, the funding scenario PCI projections should be consistent with the dollars, and we know very accurately how much we will have to spend per year based on this chart. $55 million to spend over the next 20 years. What I would recommend that Stantec does is to go out 20 years and only have paving improvements, expenditures that are consistent with what's on the chart. So then what you'll find, essentially what we're doing is we're maxing out the credit card. Life's great for 5 years, and then we got nothing left to spend for 15 years. So the PCI is going to go up, and then it's going to fall off for 15 years, and at the end of 15 years, where are we? So the way to optimize the spending is to go over the 20-year lifespan of the chart and say, if we bond in the beginning and we spend all our money paying back the bond, do we get ahead? Or are we better off bonding a much smaller amount to catch up, and then that leaves us money per year to maintain and keep improving? And so ultimately, you want to maximize the ending PCI value given a fixed dollar amount of $55 million that you have here. By taking credit for a PCI of 88 or $93 million without taking the risk, without taking the burden of paying for it, that's not fair.
Alderman Siegel.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have a question for our expert here. One of the things that's not shown on any of the charts is the dollar value equivalent as you go from different scenarios. Obviously, the do nothing cost us nothing to maintain. Then there's the routine maintenance band. So just as factors of X, for example, as you transition between the bands, I think it would be instructive to discuss that, what happens, especially given that we are apparently at the knee of the curve with a good portion of our roads. And it was my understanding from a presentation at the state level that once you get into structural improvement from preventative maintenance, you go up by a factor of 10. But that was, again, something I heard at the state level, but you're here, and I'd like to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, the general rule of thumb is for every dollar you spend in the preventative maintenance band, you offset the $6 to $8 cost that would incur shortly thereafter. So that steep jump, is 6 to 8 times fold. Typically, unit cost in the routine maintenance run anywhere between 50 and 75 cents a yard. Preventative maintenance is anywhere between $3.75 to, you can get up to $6.50 depending on the treatment. And then your structural improvement gets into the, $28 to $35 a square yard cost. And in base rehab, it jumps up from there to about $35 to $40 a square yard.
Alderman Siegel.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I appreciate that, and what I'm trying, and what I also, just to clarify, I believe that you said assuming we do routine maintenance, which on your chart seemed to be a fairly small amount of money relative to some of the other expenditures. If for those roads that needed routine maintenance, I believe you had like a $700,000 cost. That was citywide. Is that correct? Something of that order? Yeah, around 800,000, 798. That was whatever we have right now. But once we do those routine maintenance or whatever maintenance we do, we've reset the curve back to the top, right, where it's, okay, we're now at the do nothing portion. So we get some portion of the road that is much cheaper to maintain just by doing the routine maintenance, and the idea being to constantly reset the curve. So as we get the PCI up and get it out of these danger ranges, we not only save ourselves several multipliers on the cost, but actually maintaining the PCI itself is cheaper. Would that be fair to say?
That's correct.
So if we don't do something like this, beyond the we're falling behind, and given that we're at the knee of that curve where things are going to drop rapidly, on average, obviously, each street is different, we are really facing a decision where we're going to, if we don't do this, incur an enormous jump. If we say, oh, I guess we were wrong, let's revisit this a year or two from now. Because now that the distributions will shift so that now we have significantly less that are merely in routine maintenance, and now that's gone up to preventative maintenance with its consequent incredibly large jump. I think this is one of the reasons why I'm so adamantly in favor of this, And again, $7.5 million, I believe, was the limit that we could even do, just logistically because of notifications and coordinations with all the utilities, which is a major consideration in all of this. Not to mention, we have ordinances about street cutting. We just can't take the whole city and pave it all at once and then tell everybody you're not allowed to cut into the street. So that's also a very big consideration.
Also, if we close West Hollis and Broad Streets at the same time, the people in Hollis aren't going to be very happy.
Yes, a border wall of paving.
Just think of the park, the traffic flow on the Broad Street Parkway, though.
Yeah.
So, while are you done, Alderman Siegel?
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair.
Could you bring the slide back of the PCI curve?
Yeah.
There's no back arrow, doesn't work.
So, having a math background, the way I simplistically kind of interpret this is, if I have a road that costs me N dollars to build, the first year I own all of that value because I just built it. If I go out to halfway or a little further in the curve, and I put a line going down through the chart, for example, where the 77 number is, it seems to me like what the PCI indicates is, if I take the area that's in that rectangle above the curve and what's below it, and look at the ratio, that's what percentage I'm going to have to spend to get it back to 100% at that point in time. Is that about correct?
Correct.
So, and then at 20 years, basically that ratio is 1, so I'm going to have to spend 100% of what I spent to build it again. But if I look at that, if I draw that number out, say 6 years, where we've just gotten down to about 90, then the area above the curve is still very small. And that puts us back at 100%. And I then move the curve over by 6 years. By the time I get out to 20 years, I have spent very little out of the 100%, and I still have a road that's at 100% of its value. Whereas if I go from 10 years to, or 8 years or whatever that is, to 10, there's a tremendous jump there in the amount of area that's above the curve at that point. And that means my cost to restore it went up much faster over that 2 years than it did over any of the years before or after that. So we really want to make sure that we get to it before that curve becomes almost vertical, and keep doing that over and over again. I guess with regard to the question about, well, we don't have a plan to maintain it as part of the bond, I guess I have to observe that if, when any one of us took out a mortgage to get a house, we made sure that the mortgage included the money to paint the house after 10 years and to replace the roof after 20, the housing industry probably wouldn't be doing anywhere near as well as it is.
Yes, but when you apply for the mortgage, you account in your annual salary an amount that you're going to spend on maintenance. And what we don't have here is an amount accounted for maintenance. So what the statement that you made about we want to get to the steepness is all totally correct, and that's very good. And that's why what we need is for the simulation to have a fixed dollar amount and spend that fixed dollar amount over the fixed year and see how you distribute the money to maximize, take advantage of it. But it's not consistent, it's not fair, and it is misleading to take credit for a PCI value that you haven't paid for, that you bond now and you make someone else pay for it in the future. That's unfair, and that's misleading.
Alderman Siegel?
Regarding certain things like paying for in the future, well, that's the whole point of this. You're not trying to burden present-day taxpayers with the expense of having resources that last for significant amounts of time. It's a shared expense. That's what bonding's about. I also might point out that the estimates for the bonds are fairly conservative. What is our, in fact, if I might ask through the chair to Treasurer for Debt, what is our expected bonding rate, at least for this current fiscal year coming up, given that we just got a AAA rating?
bonds we just sold 2 weeks ago were at 2.53. 2.58, I'm sorry.
And I would observe that on this chart, again, conservative, which is the right thing to be, the lowest rate that we're anticipating is 3.5%. That's a full percentage point above what we just sold at, which would be a fairly significant jump in the city's finances historically. So we do have some headroom there. We're not counting on it because that's not good planning. But this idea that somehow that chart of the finances is the gospel, there are certain assumptions built in there, and we should be aware of those.
Alderman Shoneman, do you have your hand up before?
Yeah, thank
Sorry.
you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. A couple questions. One, actually, first a comment. I think the PCI, taking the time to do the PCI evaluation, I think was good. We needed that. We talked about that last year, and I think that we needed it so we know what we're dealing with. A question about the PCI and roads in general, just for my own edification. If we have a brand-new street and it's at 100% level, and then a few years later we do the routine maintenance, and it comes back up, does that give us essentially a brand-new street with the same lifespan in front of it, or is the lifespan still sort of shrinking with time, even though we're doing the maintenance? And how much can we really extend it?
Depending on the type of treatment, there's a lifetime extension. So say the road lasts 20 years, typically 20 to 25 years is an average with a good, you've done the pavement design. So things like crack sealing would give you a life extension of 3 to 5 years. Things like the micro surfacing is going to give you an extension of 7 years. Once you get it back up there, though, you can do repeated low-cost crack seals. For example, if you're out there and you see that, different cracking, you can get out there at a low cost, 50 to 75 cents a square yard, 3 times over 10 years. So in the end, that road could go 30, 40 years easily.
If I may. When a road gets the base rehabilitation, is that essentially a brand-new road, or is that still sort of fixing the old one and a reconstruction is still going to have to be done later, or is that the reconstruction?
That's basically a brand-new road, so you'd get a life extension of 20 to 25 years on that.
Okay, thanks for that. I do have another question about expenditures. I understand we're spending approximately $2.3 million per year presently. That was what your presentation was, and I think that's the number. Is this 7.5 going to be in addition to the 2.3, or is it instead of? What's happening to the 2.3?
Instead of.
So then, if I may ask a question of the mayor, what happens to the 2.3 that we're spending this year, essentially, that we're not going to spend next year?
Well, excuse me, that would go into the Road and Highway Fund, and that's why you see a balance.
Okay.
Look at the second, or
Can we
if
see
you
that
look at the
chart?
ending balance column, you see a rising balance
That
up
that
to about $5
$2.3
million. So $2.5 million is, or 2.3 is going in there every year, but less than that is going out because the paving is being done through the bonded mechanism, and it doesn't take 2.3 to pay for the debt service on those bonds in those early years.
The 2.3 is basically the revenue that's funding this plan.
So then just one other question, and just make sure I understand. If we did not do this, we would look to spend 2.3 million roughly, and we'd be basically maintaining a zero balance in that fund. Is that correct?
Yes, correct.
Thanks.
Alderman Moriarty?
The short answer is, for Alderman Shoneman, the 2.3 million is being used to pay back the bond. So that's why I was saying, over the course of 20 years, you get the $37.5 million bond and you pay for 5 years, but all the money that you would have been spending on paving is going to pave the bond. There's no money left to do anything else after 5 years. According to this sheet, only the bookkeeping shows 5 years worth of solid heavy paving and then 15 years of nothing. But the PCI projection shows $7.5 million every single year for 11 years. That's why I'm saying it's inconsistent. So if you were to scale back the bond so that, let's say it's $4 million a year for 5 years, that you would catch up. And then you got some money left in your 2.3 per year to pay the bond back and to sort of keep maintaining. And I suspect that would be the optimum way to spend the 55 million over 20 years.
Alderman Siegel?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So a couple of things. We're dealing with an amended piece of legislation, which is 5 years of a 10-year plan. In addition, I believe that we would be spending additional money to maintain the roads because, again, this is the beginning of our plan. We're not just going to sit there and do nothing after the bonds expire. And I might also point out that unless we get the roads significantly up in the PCI index, the costs are going to be enormous. It isn't like we'll just spend $4 million and then we'll have this extra money. Because that extra money just to do, quote, maintenance will allow the other roads to slip below the PCI values. So the maintenance costs are small, but the slippage is so large, it completely swamps out everything else. So it's a false economy that you're describing.
Just looking at the charts here, if we were to do that and push out the 87 to 68 PCI treatments by another 2 to 3 years, the $20 million item that's in there for 103 miles of road basically becomes about a $35 million item for 103 miles of road. So we would spend another 12 million to get back to the desired PCI at that rate. Alderman Donachus?
Yes, Mr. Chair.
Back in time.
I don't mind the title. I'm proud of having served as an alderman.
I'm sorry.
You're still trying to figure out what we're talking.
Yeah. Just on automatic mode here.
A lot of these projections in here are conservative in that the highway revenue block grant has been growing more quickly than is projected. We've used a higher interest rate than we actually have. And in addition, another thing is that we are repurposing around $4.5 million of money, earmarked money from the Broad Street Parkway project into paving, which could be accomplished this year. And that's not even in here at all. So that's $4.5 million of additional paving that you don't see here. So I think, and we may be able to come up over the course of time with some other revenue sources. So I do think this is only a projection. We don't know exactly how the paving is going to lay out. We don't know exactly how much improvement this program will bring about. We have projections, and we're looking at 5 years forward. But many of the assumptions we built into the model are conservative.
I have a question. The increase in motor vehicle revenue from 700,000 to 1.1, is that by redirecting existing revenues from the general fund to the paving fund, or is that an increase in revenues?
Well, of course, those revenues tend to increase over the years, but assuming that we maintain constant revenues into motor vehicle, it would suggest an addition of $400,000 going from current revenue stream into the road and highway fund.
Okay. Is there any further discussion? The motion was for final passage as amended. Alderman Schoeneman?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think this is a good idea. I appreciate all the comments that are made on both sides and the concerns that exist for what we're going to do after we're down the road a little bit here, so to speak. We do have to, I think one of the most important things we can do for taxpayers, their expectation is, I think, for public safety and for there to be roads to drive on. I think those are the two highest things. And I think that raises paving certainly to a very high priority in the minds of the folks who are paying the bills every year. This plan that we have, it shows further out. I don't think it's meant to be an exact mirror of the bond. I think this bond is a first step. We're looking down the road 5 years here, and with a total payout from today of 20 years, I know 15-year bonds, but a total 20-year horizon out there. And it looks to me like it's a good way to go, given the funding, and I understand all of the concerns about where the money's gonna come from later. To a degree, it's kicking the can a little bit, but it does buy us some time, because these roads are sinking. And, again, taxpayer expectation, is that our roads won't be sinking. I also think that as we want to begin to more effectively market the city, anyone who's coming here needs to, those kinds of things make a difference. Even if they don't go away saying, those roads were great, they're going to go away, with all their fillings in their head. And I think that if they can have a good experience, and I think being on good roads contributes to that. It looks to me like it's a good way to go. I hate spending the money, because I just hate spending money, but it does look like it should
Just
be a good way
occurred
to go.
to me to ask you, what happens if the pavement condition index of the runway drops to 77?
Well, I'll lose more than my teeth.
You might lose a tire, too.
Alderman Dean?
The highway block grant, how many years have we received that? Were you still in junior high school?
Yeah, we've been receiving that for 30 years, I believe.
Okay, so that's, it's just a point of that, that's something that's not gonna go away. I can't see it going away. I mean, and same with the motor vehicle revenue. I mean, if you look at how that is funded conservatively as well, every year. Yeah, and it is used to reduce the tax rate, I understand that, but, as Alderman Shoneman alluded to earlier, I mean, I think this is a good plan. Our roads need it. If you look at where we are with the index that was presented, we have some significant problems. And if we don't do anything, if we do nothing now and continue with a $2.3 million in paving funding every year, it's, we're going to have huge problems down the road. So, thank you.
Alderman Moriarty?
The options are not nothing or spend $75 million, half of which is paid for. The option is somewhere in between. The correct approach is to give Stantec an opportunity to make the simulation consistent with the dollar value. That's the best approach. But I have a question for Alderman Shoneman. This is a $75 million road repair plan, and there's $37.5 million to pay for it. Where do you envision coming up with the other $37.5 million?
Alderman Shoneman?
Thank you. At this stage, I don't have a vision for it. I don't know where it's going to come from. But it's clear that we can't just go back to 2.3. We got to find it. And we got to find it under the cap. We got to find it by increasing efficiencies elsewhere. This money has to come from somewhere. This gives us some time. And I like the idea of the 7.5 versus the 5.9, because the 5.9, it's basically kind of keeping us at the same level. The 7.5 seems to get us a little further down the road again. But what are we going to do at that point? And that's a very important question. Because if we rest on the 7.5 with the bond and say our problems are solved, I think we're going to be in trouble. And it's going to be as bad a problem later as it is today, maybe worse, because we'll be looking at bonding it again, bonding more. And I think this gets us started. I hope that in 5 years, we're not looking at another series of bonds to do it. Hopefully, we got to a point where we figured something out along the way. But we got to find this money somewhere. I agree with that completely.
Alderman Siegel?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. 15 seconds. The amended title is 5 years of a 10-year plan, okay? And it's fairly clear from all the expenses that we've been talking about that to not do this is going to cost us a fortune. And then when we're looking at something, it's going to be a lot worse. Thank you.
Further discussion of the motion to recommend final passage? If not, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? And that motion carries. Other legislation?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, additional new business, resolution, excuse me, R 17093, amending the purpose of the expendable trust fund for funding the Julia T. Ward Prize to a memorial mural project at the Amherst Street Elementary School.
Do you have a motion?
I would make a motion. For
Alderman-
final passage.
Alderman McGinnis.
I'd like to make a motion for final passage, Mr. Chairman.
We need to hold it for public hearing. I think it's on the,
It's what?
there's a motion to hold on the agenda for public hearing.
I'm sorry?
Oh, I'm sorry. Yes, Mr. Chairman, I didn't read it.
Not yet.
Okay. I'd like to make a motion to table R 17093 pending the public hearing scheduled for Monday, April 24th, 2017 at 7 PM in the Aldermanic Chamber.
Motion is to table R 17093 pending the public hearing scheduled for Monday, April 24th, 2017 at 7 PM in the Aldermanic Chamber. Alderman Siegel?
Sure, just out of curiosity, if we knew we'd need a public hearing, why didn't we just have it tonight?
I think because we have to schedule it at least 2 weeks out when we schedule it.
Okay, thank you. Thank you.
You don't want to have an empty audience because nobody knew it was happening.
Yeah.
We'll have one because nobody cares instead. Okay, any further discussion of the motion to table? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? And that motion carries. Anything tabled in committee we want to take up?
No?
General discussion? Public comment? Remarks by the alderman? No non-public session is.
Mr. President, may I?
Alderman, gentlemen?
Yes, I'd just like to speak again about what we just voted on tonight, and only to say to the folks at home that we were joking about this stuff, and we're talking about fillings rattling out and that kind of thing, and we take this seriously. It's a serious issue, and I think the expectation for good infrastructure in the city is a serious expectation. I don't want anyone to think that we're joking about this or joking about spending this kind of money, at least that I'm not. Again, I think it's a good plan, and we take it very seriously. Thank you.
Alderman LeBrun?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As a non-lifetime native of New Hampshire, I would just like to say it's a shame that a city has allowed the roads to get into the condition they are in, that we have to go through bonding a plan such as this. The roads in this city are deplorable. There's no two ways about it. But they haven't just become deplorable over the last 5 years. They've been deteriorating for the last probably 20 or 25 years, and very little has been done about it. Thank you.
Is there any further discussion? Alderman McGinnis?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I'd like to make a motion to adjourn.
Motion is to adjourn. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? And we are adjourned at 8:33.